Good morning, brothers and sisters. Peace be with you. Okay, this is our second day to read the book of Esther. Today we have Pastor Joshua with us. We will be reading book of Esther, book of Esther, chapter 4 to 6. I hope that you have read them already. So I will give the title to these three chapters. So depend on God again and again, and then colon. So cross over all the difficulties, cross over all the crises and difficulties, and running into the victory. So I'm stressing on running forward. So even in the tough times, in the crisis, so what should we do then? Whether we should stay put, don't move at all, or surrender on that's all, is it? Or do we just give up like that, or give in like that, or just going hopeless like that, or running away from the crisis? So it is not the choice of God's people. Of course, today we are facing a lot of difficulties. But all these are not our choices. Our choice is to submit ourselves to God and to move forward. That is to depend on Him again and again. Actually, the title today is to correlate the overall theme of the 2022 Jehoshua 2022. That is to correspond to the message in Psalm 22. And now it's March now. Actually, our days are very difficult. So right now, the epidemic situation has passed the peak already, but it only it comes to the plateau. The situation has come to the plateau. So at the beginning, the Hong Kong government planned to do the mass testing, but now because of the situation, it stopped. Because why? Because now quite a lot of Hong Kongers are tested with positive. I guess it goes up to 2 million people who's got positive already. So quite a lot of people has got infected already. So what to do? So it's not easy to stay quarantined anymore. Because it means that, well, every 7 people in Hong Kong, 2 of them need to stay quarantined. So how can we have so much space to quarantine all these 2 people? So it is quite difficult to do the mass testing of Hong Kong right now. So it is very tough now. And also the rate of the mortality is quite high. So every day we have over 200 people who died of the Omicron. It never happens before. So in the crisis, in the difficult time, then we learn the truth from the book of Esther. So what God is going to lead us in facing with this kind of situation, that is to depend on Him again and again. That is to cross over all the difficulties, and instead run forward to God. So from chapter 4 to the verse of chapter 5, that is to cross over all the crises with faith and submission in the Lord. So actually, in the first 3 chapters, we have talked about that God, even before the crisis came, and God has taken control of everything, has prepared everything already. Even in the book of Esther, the name of God was not mentioned, but actually we could find the traces of God everywhere. So brothers and sisters, take note of this. So actually in our current situation now, God is with us and God is here with us. But we need to have faith in Him. But only when we have faith we can see God. If we do not have faith, we cannot see Him. And you will be very scared. You will have fear. So just like in the situation that when Jesus was bringing along all his disciples in the storm and God was asleep, but at that time in the storm, all the disciples were very scared, were very afraid. And they even complained to Jesus saying that, hey, how come Jesus, you are still asleep? How could you sleep in the big storm? How come? And then Jesus said, and then Jesus said to them, you little faith. How come your faith was so little? And you are my disciples. Actually, you can triumph over all this storm. How come you could be so scared in the storm? So brothers and sisters, in the same way, we are in the storm of the world. We need to see God. We need to find God. And God strengthens us and God gives us peace as well to cross over all these storms. So we do not need to be scared. Because I always say that when there is God, there is no fear. So from chapter 4 to the verse 8 of chapter 5, is talking about that we need to follow God with faith and submission to God. Because before the crisis came, there is God's arrangement already. God has arranged already. So and you know when Haman cast the lot, he got the lot that was the time of the last month. That was after 11 months. And how come Esther could become the queen? And how come at that time there was a person called Mordecai? So that's why I always ask God. And I ask God, Hong Kong is in such a tough time. But Lord, you have brought me to Hong Kong. So on the Sunday, I mentioned it. I mentioned about the dog Togo, right? Remember the owner of the dog just threw Togo across to the shore. And but before the owner tossed Togo to the shore, he said to Togo and he apologized to him. And saying that whatever happened to you, okay, I'm sorry for that. And then right after that, he just tossed Togo across to the shore. But what will happen to Togo if his strength was not sufficient enough to bring him to land on the shore? But actually, you know that if Togo was not strong enough to exert his own strength as well to land on the shore, what will happen then? But you know, Togo knew that. Togo understood why his owner tossed him across to the shore. So that's why he cooperated with the owner. So, brothers and sisters, likewise, and God tossed us into the present situation of Hong Kong. And God's got arrangement. So in the same way, God tossed me back into Hong Kong with his own arrangements. So today, in the present situation, I do not grumble against God. Instead, I thank God for that. Today, let Hong Kong, that's why there is Joshua Cheung in Hong Kong. And just like in Citadel of Susa, there is a person called Mordecai. So today in Hong Kong, and there's a person called Jason Wong, and there's a person called Anna, Pastor Anna. There's a person called Pastor Ruby, and there's a person called you. That's your name. So nothing of it is the coincidence, because God has prearranged everything already. And God's prearranged that you and I are here in this situation. And God has prearranged Esther to be the queen. So before the crisis came, God has prearranged everything already. So when the crisis came, so all God's children need to follow God with submission and with faith, so that all God's children can cross over all the crises and difficult times. So in the verse 1 of chapter 4, and this is very important, where Mordecai learned of all that had been done. And what had been done means what Haman had been doing. So here, what had been done refers to the edict that had been issued to kill, to exterminate all the Jews by the 12 months of on 13th of 12 months. So that's why the citadel of Susa, everyone in the citadel of Susa was very worried. So it is just like the tsunami to the citadel of Susa. Everyone was panicking. The crisis had happened. The difficult times has come. So what should God's people do? How should we respond? So in verse 1, where Mordecai learned of all that had been done, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out into the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. But he went only as far as the king's gate, because no one clothed in sackcloth was allowed to enter it. That is verse 1 and verse 2. In verse 3, so in every province, that is talking about 127 provinces to which the edict and order of the king came, there was great mourning among the Jews, with fasting, weeping, and wailing. Many lay in sackcloth and ashes. Verse 3. So Mordecai and all the Jews in the nation, once they learned of it, they were mourning, and they put on the sackcloth and wail. And also they fasted and prayed as well, and they laid themselves in the ashes. What were they doing? Of course, they were very sad. So what were they doing? What does it mean by doing all these things? Or why didn't they count count how much money they have in their inheritance, and then sell everything, and then just flee to America, or maybe just flee to China or some other places? So that is talking about the place from India to North Africa, or maybe parts of Europe, or maybe China. Well, they could have done all these things, but they didn't do so. Or do they just stay very hopeless, doing nothing? No, they did not do that either. And instead, they fast and prayed. They were very sad. They were mourning. So what were they mourning for? Were they mourning for their own situation? Was it like that? Yes, it's true. You can say that. But more than that, but instead, also, they were mourning in the presence of God. Lord, are you not taking care of us anymore? Lord, how come the situations like that? Lord, but instead we come and beg for you. Lord, come and have your mercy upon us. So it really showed their dependence on God, their reliance on God, that their mourning, their wailing was towards God. So as the words of God said that the blessed is the one who mourn. So they were begging God for his acts upon them. And this is talking about their faith in the Lord. So actually, Mordecai and the Jews of the nations used their faith, exercised their faith in God to cross over their crisis. And also, we also see that Esther was about to act as well. From verse 4 onwards, that is the conversation between Esther and Mordecai. That is from verse 4 to verse 17 in chapter 4. So Mordecai had told everything about the situation of the Jews to Esther. And then Mordecai asked Esther to meet the king. Why? Because why? Because Mordecai could tell that Esther, being the queen, was the will of God, was the prearrangement of God. So in God's arrangement now, then you should arise and use your position to do something for the Jews, and also to make the whole nations of the Jews to repent before the Lord. And Mordecai could also see that the position of Queen Esther was the position given by God. So, and Mordecai also told the queen that if you don't do anything now, if you remain silent now, yet it's also true that it's been 30 days that you have seen God. Yet it's true that it's quite risky for you to go and meet the king right now, because you haven't been seeing God for 30 days already. But if you remain the silence, if you did not see the king at this moment of time, don't think that you will run away from death. Don't think that you can avoid the death, because finally, since you are also the Jew, you will end up in death anyway. Because why Mordecai could see the prearrangement of God in the lives of Esther. So that's why he asked Esther, come on, you have to walk in this path as well. So that's why he asked Esther to meet the king. So Esther thought about it, pondered about it. After the few rounds of the conversation with Mordecai, Esther decided that in verse 15, then Esther sent his reply to Mordecai, go gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my maids will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I will perish. That is verse 15 to 16. So that is talking about the fasting for 3 days. That is the fast and pray. And Esther said that I'm going to see the king. So you need to fast and pray for me right now. So the whole nation, all the Jews will fast and pray for Queen Esther. So all the whole nation will fast and pray. So in the presence of God, that they humble themselves and pray to God. So crossing over the crisis, that it takes the prayer to cross over the crisis. So we need to pray and walk according to the guidance of the Lord. If I perish, I perish, because we know that God is with me. So if God allow me to perish, then I perish, and I'm willing to do so. And this is the submission to God. And this is also the submission of our Lord Jesus Christ to the Father. And it is also the same submission that we should have as well. Of course, no one would like to perish. Everyone should like to stay alive. Of course, everyone should like to enjoy the life of abundance. But facing the crisis, what should we do? Of course, we still need to flow with the guidance of God. And we should walk forward according to the guidance of the Lord. And Esther, being the queen, followed the guidance of the Lord as well. And Mordecai, as the servant of God, also followed the guidance of God. So in the time of crisis, so everyone should follow the guidance of God and move forward. So that's why, being the leaders, we should bring the whole nation to move forward. And being the queen also need to follow the guidance of God. And the whole nation fasted and prayed and submit the whole thing to the Lord. So actually, we are like this. I am like this as well. In the facing the crisis, the situation right now, we are standing in this place, in this position, and we know that we realize that this is the will of God, this is the guidance of God who brings me into the situation, to brings me into Hong Kong to voice for Him. So this is God's idea. This is God's will to allow us, to bless us with this church, with so many brothers and sisters. So in this situation, what should we do then? Of course, we follow the guidance of God. We move forward continuously. And then finally, we will cross over all these crises. So after the fasting and prayer, and then what should Esther do? And then after the 3 days of the fasting and prayer, and then Esther put on the robes and went into the inner courts of the palace. And then the king extended the golden scepter to Esther to give her the grace. And in the same way, God gives us the grace as well. And today, God extended His golden scepter to all His children. So Queen Esther requested the king to bring along Haman to the feast that Esther has prepared. Well, anyway, it's a very special request because Queen requests the king to bring along Haman to the feast. And that is the feast that Queen has prepared. So that's why on that very day, the king brought along Haman for the feast. So everyone was very happy. And the king was very happy and even asked the queen that, hey, what do you want? What do you need? Even the parts of my kingdom, I will give it to you as well. And then the request of the queen was again that, God, a king, would you like to bring Haman to my second feast as well? So that is talking about, that is the verse 8 onward in the chapter 5. So that's why the king again brought along Haman to the second feast of Esther. Then why didn't Queen Esther told the king in the first banquets that, hey, you know, king, actually Haman was a bad guy? Why didn't he say that in the first feast? Why didn't he, being the queen, tell the king in the first feast? Instead, he had been waiting upon the best timing. And then in verse 9 to verse 14, in chapter 4, so waiting for the work of God, waiting for the acts of God. Actually, Queen Esther has been waiting for the acts of God. The children of God should be patient, waiting upon the acts of God. Queen Esther has been waiting upon the moments of the acts of God. She was not the one to take the initiative to act on something. Instead, she was just simply asking Haman to come to the feast, and she submits the whole issue to the Lord. She was waiting for the moments for the acts of the Lord himself. So that's why in the first feast, the queen did not really say much. She simply asked the king to bring along Haman to the second feast. She was simply waiting upon the right timing of God. So that's why in the first place, she didn't really say anything against Haman to the king. So remember, in the very first place, even the king extended the golden scepter to the queen. She didn't even say anything to ask for anything specifically, except asking the king to bring along Haman to the second feast. She didn't really say anything against Haman. She didn't do anything on her own. And instead, she was waiting upon the right moment of God. She was waiting for the best moments of God. So in the second feast, now she knew that it was the moment of God now. So children of God, we should act upon the moments of God. Even in the face of the enemies, we should not use our own efforts. We should not do anything out of our own initiative. What we needed to do is just to wait upon the moment of God. Instead, we should depend on God again and again, to flow with God, to follow God. So that's why in the second feast, Queen Esther only waits till the second feast that she told the whole thing to the king. So in verse 9, So in verse 9 of chapter 5, Haman went out that day happy and in high spirits. But when he saw Mordecai at the king's gate and observed that he neither rose nor showed fear in his presence, he was filled with rage against Mordecai. So you see, on that day, Haman was very angry with Mordecai because he thought that, hey, even the Queen Esther showed me the respect and honor. And how come, Mordecai, you did not show me any respect and honor at all? So that's why he was very angry at Mordecai. So at that very moment, Haman was enraged. So that's why he went back home and he said to his wife and the other people at the families, and that everyone proposed to him that, hey, and then everyone proposed to him that, hey, how come? Maybe you should set up a tall post, set up a tall stack to kill Mordecai. So that is the plan of the wicked people, to kill God's people, to kill Mordecai. So when the wicked did do something, and God at the same time will extend his hand to save the righteous as well. You know, Haman's idea was to ask the king to kill Mordecai by putting him on the long tall pole, putting him on the stake. And now we come to chapter 6, from the beginning to the end of chapter 6. So God's people run into the victory. And we can witness that God's people running into victory when God extends his hand to help. In verse 1 of chapter 6, that night the king could not sleep, so he ordered the book of the Chronicles, the record of his reign, to be brought in and read to him. Well, that is talking about the history that Mordecai has been saving the king. Actually, this is the prearrangement of God. And you know, that is the time that God has prearranged for the king to read this history, to understand this history. And that is the moment that prepared by the Lord, that the king knew of this history, that two of his people were plotting to assassinate him. Well, you know, that is the prearrangement of God. That is not by coincidence that the king could not sleep. And that is not by coincidence that he could not sleep. And that is not by coincidence that was the Mordecai who saved him from the assassination. All these things are actually the prearrangement of God. And this is not by coincidence that the king learned of the fact that he did not reward Mordecai of his saving him. And actually, at that very moment of time, the king would like to thank for Mordecai, would like to reward Mordecai for saving him. And all these ideas are put by the Lord in him. And then also at that very moment, and Haman went into the palace to meet the king. Actually, this is the idea of the Haman to ask the king to kill Mordecai by putting him on the stake. But before he could tell all these things to the king, and God had told Haman that he would like to reward the person who saved him. And Haman thought that it was the king's idea to honor him instead. So that's why Haman was thinking that, oh, it must be the king's idea to honor him. So that's why, in return, Haman threw the idea to the king that, well, when you honor someone, you should give him the robe, you should give him the ring, you should give him the authority, you should allow him to ride on the royal horse, you should allow someone to escort this person, something like that, because he was thinking that the king was thinking of honoring him. So that's why the king replied to Haman that, okay, then whatever you said, then you did all these things. Then you allow someone to put on the robe, and you allow someone to ride on the royal horse. You allow someone to put on the ring. Then we come to the verse 11 of chapter 6. Verse 11 of chapter 6. So Haman got the robe and the horse. He robed Mordecai and led him on the horseback through the city streets, proclaiming before him, "This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor." Actually, Haman, the wicked one, would like to kill Mordecai, God's people. But before he opened the mouth and say anything, but instead the king asked him, "And what would you do to honor the person?" And then this wicked person thought that the king would like to honor him. And then instead the king said that, "Okay, just do whatever you said to honor the person." And finally, this wicked person just did what the king asked him to do. But in a very ironical way, what this wicked person did was to honor his own enemy, was to honor Mordecai, the person he planned to kill. And God turned around the whole situation. So what's the idea of the wicked being fulfilled, or the idea of God being fulfilled? So actually the idea of the king was the idea of God, because I tell you that at that time, at that very moment, the king could not sleep, was prearranged by God. All these things were the prearrangement of God actually. And God arranged the whole thing for the king not to be able to sleep, and that he could read the chronicles, he could read the history that he found about Mordecai who saved him, but without being rewarded. All these things were the prearrangement of God. And here is very special here. So after the verse 11, everyone should be very happy. So Haman, after honoring Mordecai unwillingly, he returned home. When he arrived home, his wife and his friends said to him like that. So when we read in Chinese, we might not fully understand. The original meaning was that in verse 12, if Mordecai is the Jew, so right at this moment in the presence of Mordecai, you started to fail. So it means that if Mordecai is the Jew, in the presence of Mordecai, right at this presence, since you are right before him, you start to ruin, you start to fall. You will not prevail against him. It means that you will not win over him. For sure, you will fall before him. So surely you will fall before him. You will surely before him. You will surely fail in the presence of him. So we can tell that Mordecai will surely win because he is the Jew. If he is the Jew, and also right now you are in the presence of him, you will ruin for sure. You will fail for sure. And finally you will fail. And actually you are ruining, and finally you will come to complete failure. So all these things, and actually the wife and all the friends of Haman spoke to Haman like this. So right at this moment, Haman was called to attend the second feast of Esther. So we can tell that. So God's people will surely win, will surely get the victory. And God's people start to get the victory. So brothers and sisters, in these difficult times, we should depend on God again and again. So in the same way of Mordecai and Esther, we need to wait for the moment. We need to wait upon the moment of God who will act. So we relied on him, we depend on him. And we believe that the situation of Hong Kong will start getting better. And God will bless us, protect us. So here I would like to bless every one of you that we continue to exercise our faith in him, depending on him again and again. And for sure, finally we will get the victory. We will cross over all these difficulties. We run towards the victory. Amen.